The air in Dallas shimmered with the heat of late June, the kind that sticks to your skin and hums beneath the cicadas. Jack Reynolds leaned against his old Ford F-150, his shirt collar open, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The Reynolds family reunion had been loud and messy, the way family always was, and filled with laughter, old stories, and more beer than anyone would admit. His daughter Emily hugged him tight before he left. "Drive safe, Dad, it's late," she said, her voice soft but firm. Jack smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You know me, kiddo. I've driven this road 100 times. Her eyes lingered on him. "Just text when you get home." He promised he would. The night sky was clear, the stars bright over the Dallas skyline as he pulled out onto the highway. It was 9:30 p.m., and the stretch between Dallas and Denton was mostly empty at that hour, just the occasional pair of headlights cutting through the dark. The radio crackled to life with an old country tune. Jack drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, humming along. He thought about the reunion, his brother Tom's jokes, his sister's casserole, the uneasy conversation about their late father's ranch. Money always had a way of stirring up ghosts. Still, he told himself things would settle. Family always found a way to forgive. At a gas station on the outskirts of Dallas, he stopped for fuel and coffee. The clerk nodded politely, half asleep, as Jack filled his thermos. Security footage would later show him smiling faintly, tipping his cap as he left. Behind him, another truck, a dark Chevy, rolled out onto the same road. The miles passed quietly. The flat Texas landscape stretched wide and endless, dotted with lone gas pumps and flickering neon signs. Jack's headlights carved through the dark ribbon of asphalt, the hum of the tires steady and calm. Somewhere near Lake Louisville, a thin mist began to rise from the fields. He slowed down, squinting at the fog ahead. The dashboard clock blinked 10:12 p.m. The road curved, dipping near the tree line where shadows thickened. A shape moved behind him, headlights too close, too fast. Jack frowned, glancing at his rearview mirror. "Easy, buddy," he muttered, easing to the right lane. But the truck stayed close, its lights glaring bright. He tightened his grip on the wheel. Maybe just some impatient driver. Maybe nothing at all. Still, a flicker of unease crept up his spine. As the road curved again, the glare disappeared. Silence. Only the hum of the tires and the far-off whisper of the wind through the trees. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. The last thing anyone would remember was the sound of an engine fading into the night. That was the last time anyone saw Jack Reynolds alive. Before we dive into what really happened that night, make sure to subscribe. This story took decades to uncover, and what follows may change everything you thought you knew about small-town secrets in Texas. The next morning broke clear and warm over Denton County. The cicadas were already singing when Emily Reynolds realized something was wrong. Her father's old Ford wasn't parked in the driveway. At first she thought maybe he'd stopped for breakfast somewhere, maybe called an old army buddy on the way. But when noon came and his phone went straight to voicemail, the air around her felt heavy. She called her Uncle Tom. "Have you heard from Dad?" Tom sounded distracted. "No, haven't talked to him since the reunion." "Maybe he stayed in Dallas last night?" "He said he was going home." Her voice trembled. "He promised he'd text." By late afternoon, the worry had grown into something raw and pulsing. Emily drove the stretch of I-35 herself, eyes scanning every ditch, every side road. Nothing. The empty highway shimmered in the heat, and she could almost hear her father's laugh echoing in her head. That evening, she filed a missing person report at the Denton County Sheriff's Office. The deputy at the counter jotted down notes while Emily clutched a photo of her father, the same picture that would soon appear on news bulletins across North Texas. Deputy Harris leaned back in his chair. "You said he left Dallas around 9:30. "Yes." "He never made it home. We'll start a search along his route. Sometimes folks just pull over somewhere. Could be car trouble." But Emily's gut told her different. Jack Reynolds wasn't the kind of man to just disappear. The next day, police organized a search along the route from Dallas to Denton. Helicopters scanned the wooded areas near Lake Louisville, and volunteers combed the shoulders of county roads with flashlights and dogs. Neighbors brought water and sandwiches. Strangers joined in. Mrs. Lopez, Jack's elderly neighbor, told a deputy she'd seen headlights near the lake around midnight. "Could have sworn I heard an engine rev, then stop sudden," she said, her brow furrowed. "Didn't think much of it till I heard he was missing." Detectives checked the area, but the mud near the shore showed only old tire tracks and beer cans from weekend fishermen. Nothing pointed to Jack. By the third day, the local news ran the story. Denton veteran vanishes after family gathering. Reporters stood near his empty home, the porch light still on. Emily appeared briefly on camera, her voice breaking as she said, "If anyone saw my father, please just call. He's a good man. He's a father, a friend, a veteran. We just need him home." The coverage brought tips, dozens of them. A truck like his seen near Gainesville, a man who looked like Jack at a diner in Oklahoma, but every lead ended the same, nowhere. The sheriff's office promised to keep searching, but as days turned into weeks, the calls slowed, and the hope in Emily's voice grew thinner. The last official search ended 2 months later, with no trace found. In the quiet after the news crews left, the only sound in the house was the ticking of the kitchen clock, the same clock Jack had hung there himself. Emily stared at it, whispering to the silence, "Where did you go, Dad?" And somewhere out near Lake Louisville, the wind carried a faint echo across the water, as if trying to answer her. Detective Laura Kent stood at the edge of the conference room table, scanning the file marked Reynolds, Jack D. The case was barely 72 hours old, but already it felt heavier than most. She'd seen missing persons before, too many, but something about this one pulled at her. Maybe it was the photograph. A man with kind eyes, his arm wrapped around a young woman who looked heartbreakingly hopeful. Kent turned to Deputy Harris. "Last confirmed sighting was the gas station off I-35, correct?" He nodded. "Surveillance caught him buying coffee around 9:47 p.m. Truck was full of gas, nothing suspicious. Then he pulls out and disappears. Any vehicles behind him?" she asked. Harris flipped through the still frames. "Yeah, there's another pickup. Looks like a black Chevy, maybe late 90s model. Plates unreadable." Kent leaned in. "You get the timestamp on that?" "Same minute he leaves." She exhaled slowly. "That's not a coincidence." Outside, the Texas sun beat down hard, making the asphalt shimmer. She drove the route herself that afternoon, from the gas station north toward Denton, watching the road bend and narrow, the fences give way to open fields. She imagined the headlights that night, the hum of tires, the loneliness of the road. At the edge of Lake Louisville, she stopped. The air was thick with humidity and the faint scent of algae. A fisherman nearby nodded when she flashed her badge. "You out here about that missing vet?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "You see or hear anything strange last week?" The man squinted across the water. "Not me, but there was talk about a truck speeding down Old Ferry Road that night. Folks said it sounded like it was in a hurry." Kent noted it down. The road led to a dead end near the lake, a bad place to take a turn in the dark. Back at the station, she gathered the team. "We'll search that stretch tomorrow. Bring the divers. If his truck went in, we'll find it." Emily showed up just as Kent was finishing her report. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her voice was steady. "Detective, you'll keep looking, right?" Kent met her gaze. "I don't stop until I know what happened." Emily nodded, gripping the edge of the desk. "He wasn't running away. My dad wouldn't do that. He always came home." Kent believed her. "Then we'll bring him home." For days they searched the lake's edge. Divers waded through murky water. Drones scanned from above. But each lead dissolved into nothing. Tire tracks in the mud washed away in the rain. The black Chevy couldn't be traced. Too many like it in the county. By the end of the week, Kent sat alone in her office, the hum of the air conditioner loud in the silence. She closed the file and whispered to herself, "You didn't just vanish, Jack. Somebody made you disappear." And though she didn't know it yet, that conviction would drive her for the next 25 years. Weeks stretched into months, and the missing person posters of Jack Reynolds began to fade under the Texas sun. The ink on his smiling face bled from the rain, peeling at the corners of gas station windows and telephone poles. But Emily refused to stop. Every morning she checked her voicemail, hoping for a message that never came. One afternoon, the Denton County Sheriff's Office received a call from a truck driver outside Shreveport, Louisiana. "Pretty sure I saw your missing vet," the man said. "Older guy, green jacket, sitting at a diner off I-20, looked tired." Detective Laura Kent and a deputy drove 6 hours that same day. The diner waitress confirmed a man had come in. Same height, same jacket, same dog tags hanging from his neck. But by the time they checked security footage, the man had vanished. His truck, if he had one, left no record. Back in Denton, the phones rang non-stop. Sightings from Oklahoma, Amarillo, even a small town in New Mexico. Some callers swore Jack had stopped for directions. Others claimed he was camping near a river. Each tip raised Emily's hopes, only to crush them hours later. "I just don't get it," she told Detective Kent one evening, her voice hoarse from crying. "It's like he evaporated." Kent rubbed her temples. "Sometimes people want to disappear, Emily, especially veterans. They've seen things that make them need to start over." Emily shook her head fiercely. "Not my dad. He wasn't running from anything." The detective's silence spoke volumes. Cases like this, they twisted through lies, memories, and half-truths. Everyone believed something different. Then came another rumor. A local man claimed he'd seen Jack arguing with someone at a rest stop north of Dallas. "Heard shouting, maybe around 10 that night," the man said. "2 trucks, one green, one black." Kent pressed for details, but his story wavered. "Could have been another night," he admitted finally. "Things blur together, you know." Emily's Uncle Tom called her the next morning. "You've got to stop letting the cops drag this out," he said. "It's tearing the family apart. Maybe Jack just needed space." "Space?" Emily snapped. "You think he'd leave me wondering if he's dead or alive?" "Sometimes people just break, Em," he muttered, and hung up. His words haunted her, but deep down something didn't feel right. Her father's old truck, his wallet, his dog tags, none of it had surfaced. People didn't just vanish. Months passed. The search teams dwindled. Funding ran out. By Christmas, Jack Reynolds' name slipped from the headlines. New tragedies replaced old ones, and the phone at the sheriff's office stopped ringing. Detective Kent, still haunted by the case, kept a copy of Jack's file in her desk. Every so often she'd open it, the photo, the map, the gas station footage, and whisper to herself, "You're still out there somewhere." The case went cold in early 2000, officially suspended but never forgotten. And as the years moved forward, a quiet ache settled over Denton County. A story unresolved, a man gone without a trace, and a daughter who refused to believe that hope could die as easily as memory. Time has a cruel way of softening noise into memory. By 2001, the name Jack Reynolds had drifted quietly from the evening news. His disappearance became another story lost to dusty archives, a mystery without an ending. But for Emily, every day still began and ended with his absence. She kept his old army jacket draped over the back of a kitchen chair, the faint smell of motor oil and cedar still clinging to it. Some mornings she'd pour 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for him, before remembering he wasn't coming home. In 2003, she graduated from college and took a job teaching 4th grade in Denton. Her students never knew that behind her calm smile lived a grief that never really slept. Each year on June 17th, she left fresh wildflowers by the edge of Lake Louisville. "Just in case," she'd whisper. The lake, though, never gave anything back. Detective Laura Kent retired in 2005, handing over her badge but keeping one file, Reynolds, Jack D. She'd open it from time to time, tracing the lines of the old map, wondering which turn he'd taken, which moment had sealed his fate. Her colleagues joked she was haunted by ghosts, but she didn't laugh. She knew some ghosts didn't rest until they were found. By 2010, Emily's search had become quieter, but no less determined. She joined online forums for missing persons, uploaded digitized versions of her father's photo, and connected with others who'd lost loved ones to the same cruel silence. In one late-night message, a stranger wrote, "Hope isn't proof, but sometimes it's all you've got." She printed it out and pinned it to her fridge. The following decade passed in slow, heavy seasons. The Denton countryside changed. New subdivisions rose, highways widened, but Lake Louisville remained the same, still deep, secretive. Locals told stories about it, about the cars and boats buried beneath the water, relics of accidents and storms. Sometimes, when the wind blew across its surface, it seemed to whisper, "Some things stay hidden for a reason." Emily didn't believe that. She couldn't. In 2020, the anniversary marked 21 years since Jack's disappearance. A small local newspaper published a retrospective, "Where is Jack Reynolds? 2 decades without answers." The article caught the attention of a private investigator named Rick Marlowe, a former Dallas cop turned freelancer. He called Emily after reading it. "Miss Reynolds," he said, his voice rough from years of cigarettes, "I've looked into cases like your dad's before. They don't just vanish, not entirely. There's always something left behind." Emily hesitated, her hope flickering like a candle. "The police stopped looking years ago." "Then we'll start from scratch," Marlowe replied. "But if we find the truth, you have to be ready for it, whatever it is." She agreed. That night Emily sat on her porch, the air warm and still. She thought about the promise she'd made to her father, that she'd be fine, that she'd keep going. But she wasn't fine. She wouldn't be until she knew what really happened on that road in 1999. And somewhere deep in her heart, a whisper grew louder. Maybe the truth was still waiting, buried, but not gone. It was late March 2024 when the drought hit North Texas hard. Lake Louisville, once wide and deep, shrank under the relentless sun, exposing banks that hadn't been seen in decades. Fishermen complained about low water levels, but for one man, the drought revealed something entirely different. Around noon on a quiet Saturday, a local named Ben Carter steered his small fishing boat toward a narrow cove on the lake's northern edge. He'd been coming there since childhood, but that day something caught his eye, a glint of metal half buried in the mud. At first he thought it was debris, maybe an old fence post or a boat trailer. But as the sunlight hit it just right, he saw the unmistakable curve of a wheel rim. "Now what the hell's that?" he muttered, cutting the engine. When he waded closer, he realized it wasn't a piece of junk. It was a truck, submerged and rusted, its roof barely visible beneath the murky water. He pulled out his phone and called the sheriff's office. By the time deputies arrived, the afternoon heat shimmered off the lake bed. The license plate, though corroded, was still legible, TX7FPK219. The number matched one in a long-closed case file, Jack Reynolds, missing person 1999. Word spread fast through Denton County. Within hours, news vans gathered along the shoreline, their cameras pointed at the muddy outline of the vehicle. A recovery team arrived the next morning with cranes and tow straps. As the Ford F-150 emerged from the water, its paint stripped to dull brown and grey, a hush fell over everyone watching. Inside the cab, investigators found a wallet, a rusted keychain, and a set of dog tags that read, "Reynolds, J.D." In the driver's seat rested a skeleton, seatbelt still fastened, the bones of one hand resting against the door. The remains were sent to the state lab for analysis, but deep down everyone already knew. When the DNA results came back a week later, the confirmation hit like a storm. The body was Jack Reynolds. Emily received the call on a Thursday morning. She sat in her classroom after her students had gone home, staring at the phone in her hand. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Oh, you found him?" "Yes, ma'am," the investigator replied gently. "We found your father." Tears came slowly, not from shock, but from the release of 25 years of waiting. She drove to the lake that evening, the sun setting low over the horizon, painting the water gold and red. Standing at the shoreline, she whispered, "I knew you were here." For Detective Laura Kent, now retired, the news reached her through an old colleague. She drove out to the site the next day, her heart pounding as she saw the crater where the truck had been pulled. "You finally came home," she murmured. But as she examined the case photos, one detail refused to fit. The seatbelt had been cut and the ignition was still in the on position. That single observation changed everything. When the news of Jack Reynolds' discovery reached the Denton County Sheriff's Office, a quiet ripple of disbelief moved through the department. For a quarter century, his file had gathered dust in the archives, a reminder of an unsolved mystery everyone thought would stay buried. But one person couldn't let it rest. Detective Laura Kent sat on her porch, sipping black coffee when her old partner, now Captain Harris, called. "Laura, you might want to sit down," he said. "I already am," she replied dryly. "What's going on?" "They found Reynolds." For a long moment she said nothing. The hum of cicadas filled the silence. "You mean his truck?" "His truck, his remains, Lake Louisville. It's him." Kent closed her eyes. 25 years vanished in an instant, replaced by that same ache she'd carried since 1999. "Who's handling it?" "New kid, Detective Ramos. Smart but green." "He could use your eyes on this." She hesitated, then sighed. "Send me the file." The next morning she sat across from Ramos in the precinct's small conference room, the familiar scent of burnt coffee and stale air filling the space. He looked nervous, tapping a pen against the folder. "Ma'am, I've reviewed the photos and there's something strange." Kent nodded. "The seat belt." He blinked. "You noticed too?" "Cut clean," she said. "That's not an accident. And the ignition was still on, which means whoever did this didn't bother to shut the truck down. They wanted it gone fast." Ramos flipped to another photo. "We also found pressure marks on the rear bumper. Paint transfer, dark color. Possibly another vehicle pushing from behind." Kent leaned forward. "Then we're not dealing with a crash. We're dealing with a push." She stared at the photo of Jack's rusted Ford, the years of corrosion unable to hide the violence of its end. Her voice softened. "He didn't just drive into that lake. Someone put him there." Later that afternoon, Kent visited Emily Reynolds, who hadn't stopped shaking since the discovery. The teacher's home was filled with reminders of her father, photos, medals, the folded flag from his service. Emily looked at Kent with red-rimmed eyes. "You think someone did this to him?" Kent didn't answer immediately. "There are signs that don't match an accident. We're reopening the case." "After all this time?" "Time doesn't erase truth," Kent said quietly. Emily's lip trembled. "Then find it, please. Don't let him just be a file again." "I won't," Kent promised. That night she reopened her old notes from 1999, the maps, the interviews, the photographs. Each line of faded ink told a story that suddenly made more sense than ever before. She circled 2 words she'd written in the margin years ago: black truck. Her pulse quickened. The case she could never forget was breathing again, and for the first time in 25 years, Laura Kent felt the old spark return, not of closure, but of pursuit. The Denton County Sheriff's Office buzzed with quiet urgency. 25 years after Jack Reynolds vanished, Detective Laura Kent found herself once again piecing together the night that had haunted her career. Technology had changed, but the questions hadn't. "Pull up the route," she told Detective Ramos. A digital map of North Texas flickered onto the monitor, blue lines tracing the path from Dallas to Denton, every gas station and rural turn carefully plotted. Ramos typed in coordinates. "This is the last confirmed sighting, 9:47 p.m., the Shell station on I-35. Kent nodded. "From there it's a 40-minute drive home." But he never made it. The truck entered the lake near the old Ferry Road curve. That's at least 8 miles off his route. Ramos frowned. "So why take that road?" Kent's answer came slow. He didn't. They replayed the security footage from that 1999 gas station. Grainy, time-stamped and silent, Jack filled his tank, waved to the clerk, then drove off. Seconds later, another truck, darker, bulkier, followed. Kent froze the frame. "There," she said, tapping the screen. "That's the vehicle that pushed him." Ramos squinted. "Black Chevy, late 90s model. Same as the report from back then." She flipped through her old notes. Tire impressions near the lake. The techs couldn't identify them at the time, but they logged width and tread pattern. "Pull that up." He did, and within minutes, a 3D reconstruction appeared. Kent stared at it in silence, her jaw tightening. "That's a match," she said. "Exactly the same tread design as the Chevy Silverado." Ramos leaned back. "So whoever drove that truck followed him from Dallas and forced him off the road. Why, robbery?" Kent shook her head. "Nothing was stolen. His wallet and cash were still there." She hesitated, then added, "But the person had to know him. Otherwise, why target him on that specific stretch of road?" She sifted through old witness statements, her finger pausing on a familiar name. Lopez. Maria. "She told me back then she heard 2 trucks that night," Kent murmured. "Said she heard engines rev, then a splash." "Think she's still around?" Ramos asked. "She was in her 60s then." "Let's find out." Later that day, they visited Mrs. Lopez's daughter, who lived in the same neighborhood. "Mom passed a few years back," she said, "but I remember that night. She said she couldn't sleep because of the noise. Told us she thought someone had gone off the road." Kent nodded, her instincts sharpening. She was right. As the detectives left, Ramos glanced at her. "What do you think happened out there, Laura?" She didn't answer right away. The wind cut across the open fields, carrying the faint smell of rain. "Someone made sure Jack Reynolds never made it home," she finally said, "and I think that someone's been living with it ever since." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We just need to find out who." As Detective Kent and Ramos continued to retrace Jack Reynolds' last steps, one name kept resurfacing in the haze of the investigation: Tom Reynolds. Jack's older brother, a man who had once been a pillar in their community, had not been questioned for years. But as the investigation deepened, questions about Tom began to creep into the picture. Emily had always spoken highly of her uncle, but Kent couldn't ignore the strange undercurrent of tension in the family's history. There had been rumors, whispers about the Reynolds family business, disagreements over the inheritance of their father's ranch, and a sudden coolness between the brothers in the months leading up to Jack's disappearance. Kent knew that any new lead, no matter how small, had to be explored. She sat in her car outside Tom Reynolds' home, the sun dipping low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. It had been years since she'd seen him. The last time, he had seemed the picture of calm, a well-respected businessman, the quiet one of the family. But now the weight of his brother's unresolved disappearance hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Ramos looked uneasy beside her. "You think he's involved?" Kent didn't answer immediately. She studied Tom's house, the lights flickering on in the windows, and the faint sound of dogs barking in the distance. "There's no such thing as coincidence in this line of work," she finally said. "People don't disappear without a reason." They approached the door, and Tom greeted them with a polite but cautious smile. "Detectives, what brings you by?" "We're just following up on some new leads," Kent said, watching his expression closely. "Do you mind if we ask you a few questions about Jack?" Tom's smile faltered just a bit. "I've told you everything I know." "I haven't seen him since that night. You know, the whole family's been through enough." Kent nodded, then casually asked, "You and Jack had any disagreements in the months before his disappearance?" Tom's eyes hardened. "Look, I don't know what you think you're getting at, but Jack and we didn't always see eye to eye, the ranch, the will, that things got messy. But I would never hurt him." Kent noted his defensive tone. There was a flicker of anger in his voice, but also something else, something that felt like a mixture of guilt and fear. "You've mentioned the ranch before," she said, pressing. "Was there anything about that situation that might have caused Jack to leave?" Tom's jaw clenched. "You're asking the same questions over and over. It's been 25 years. He stepped back, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation. "I don't know where Jack is, and I don't know what else you expect from me." Kent stood her ground. "We're just trying to find the truth, Tom. People don't just disappear like this. Someone knows something. Who's? If you remember anything at all, now's the time to speak up." Tom hesitated, his eyes shifting toward the house. For a moment, Kent could see the weight of the years on his face, the burden of something unspoken. Finally, he sighed, looking down. "I'm not hiding anything," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wish it was over." As the detectives left, Ramos gave Kent a skeptical glance. "You think he's involved?" Kent didn't answer. The night air felt heavier than before, charged with unanswered questions. "I don't know. But I do know this. The truth is somewhere in that family. And I'm going to find it." The investigation had been a slow burn for weeks, but the breakthrough came unexpectedly, like a thunderclap in the middle of a summer storm. Detective Kent's instinct had been right. The deeper she dug, the more the past resurfaced, dragging with it not just memories but dark truths that had been buried for far too long. On a crisp Friday morning, as the early fall air carried a sense of change, Kent sat at her desk, flipping through the case file once more. The tension was palpable in the office. They had all known for days that the pieces were falling into place. Now, it was just a matter of taking the final step. "I've got it," Ramos said suddenly, entering her office with a look of urgency. Kent looked up, the sharpness in her eyes matching the moment. "What do you have?" He handed her a sheet of paper, the name at the top catching her attention, Tom Reynolds. "An old financial report from the ranch," Ramos said. "Seems Tom was in serious debt, but his brother Jack was planning to sell the property to pay it off. Jack was going to use the money to clear up some of the mess Tom had created." Kent's eyes narrowed. "And Tom didn't want that?" "Exactly," Ramos replied. "I've also got an old phone record from the night Jack disappeared. It shows that Tom made a call to Jack's house just an hour before Jack was seen at the gas station. We never picked it up before, but now it's starting to make sense." Kent set the report down, her fingers tapping the edge of the paper. She knew they had to act fast. The evidence was enough. But it wasn't just the financial mess. It was the fear that had shown in Tom's face during their conversation, the anger, the guilt. "We're going in," Kent said, her voice steady but sharp. "It's time to bring him in." An hour later, the team gathered at Tom Reynolds' home, the same quiet suburban neighborhood that had once seemed so idyllic. The air felt heavy as they pulled up to his house. This was no longer a missing person case. This was about justice. Tom answered the door, his face instantly shifting when he saw the badges. "Detective Kent, what's this about now?" Kent didn't waste time. "Tom Reynolds, you're under arrest for the murder of your brother, Jack Reynolds." The words hung in the air, thick with years of unspoken tension. Tom's expression faltered, then hardened. He took a step back, but not to run, just to process. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "I didn't kill him." Kent held his gaze, unwavering. "We've got the evidence, Tom, the financial records, the phone call, the truck. It's over." Tom's eyes darted around, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. His shoulders slumped. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. It got out of hand. He was going to ruin everything." Ramos stepped forward. "What happened that night, Tom?" "What did you do?" Tom closed his eyes for a long moment, as if reliving the scene. I went to talk to him. We argued. About the ranch. He was going to take everything from me. I didn't want him to go to the authorities, but I didn't mean to push him into the lake. It was an accident. He was supposed to just leave." Kent's heart sank. The tragedy of it all, the brotherly rivalry, the greed, and now the loss of a life. "We'll let the courts sort it out," Kent said, her voice cold but steady. "But you're not going anywhere." As Tom was handcuffed and led away, Emily stood in the background, her face a mixture of disbelief and relief. The weight of 25 years, of not knowing what happened to her father, was finally starting to lift. But the road ahead wasn't easy. There would be no easy closure, just the long, difficult process of healing. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to breathe. Jack Reynolds' truth had finally been uncovered. The arrest of Tom Reynolds shook the community, but for Emily, it only deepened the chasm between the life she had known and the one that was unfolding. She had always believed in the good in people, especially in her family. Yet, as the details of her uncle's involvement in her father's death unfolded, she felt a sense of betrayal so profound it almost knocked the wind out of her. Emily had been to the courthouse every day since Tom's arrest, sitting in the back, her eyes fixed on the man who had raised her, the man she had always admired, the same man who had taken away her father. Now she sat alone in her car, parked outside the courthouse, her fingers gripping the steering wheel. She felt like she had been holding her breath for years, waiting for answers, for closure. But now that she had them, she didn't know how to move forward. "I should feel relieved," she muttered to herself, "but all I feel is empty." Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from Detective Kent. "How are you holding up?" She stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. What could she say? How do you explain the hollow space inside you when the truth you've been searching for, is so much darker than you ever imagined? Emily didn't respond immediately. She needed time. The truth about her father's death was not just a weight on her shoulders. It had become a part of her identity, and the unraveling of it felt like an earthquake beneath her feet. Later that evening, Emily stood at the edge of Lake Louisville, the same place where her father's truck had been found, now a symbol of the pain she had endured. The water, once so calm and serene, now seemed like an unforgiving mirror of her emotions, turbulent, unpredictable, and cold. She remembered her father's laugh, the way he always made her feel safe, even when things were hard. He had always promised her that no matter what, they would get through things together. But now, standing at the edge of the water, she realized that she was truly alone. The sound of footsteps behind her startled her, and she turned to see Detective Kent walking toward her. Her face, though weary, was calm, understanding. "You've been quiet," Kent said softly, standing beside her. Emily nodded, her eyes fixed on the water. "How do you live with this kind of truth, knowing the person who's supposed to protect you is the one who—" Her voice broke, and she had to pause to steady herself. Kent looked out at the lake, her gaze distant. "You don't have to live with it all at once. You take it day by day. And sometimes you let others help you carry the weight." Emily's lips trembled. "I don't know if I can forgive him." "You don't have to," Kent said gently. "But you can decide what kind of person you want to be, what you want your father's memory to mean. That's yours to choose." The weight of those words sank deep into Emily's chest. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of something more than grief, a glimmer of hope. Maybe in time she would find a way to move forward. But for now, standing beside Kent at the edge of the lake, she wasn't alone. The courtroom was packed the day Tom Reynolds stood trial for the murder of his brother. It was the first time in 25 years that the community had gathered to confront the mystery that had haunted them all. The air inside the courthouse felt thick with anticipation, tension, and an undercurrent of disbelief. Emily sat in the back row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The soft murmur of the crowd faded as the judge entered, his gavel striking once to bring the room to order. Tom, in a crisp suit, sat motionless at the defense table, his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding the gaze of the people who once called him a friend. The prosecution began, presenting the evidence that had taken years to gather. Detective Kent took the stand first, detailing the findings of the investigation. The seatbelt, the unshut ignition, the financial motive. It was all laid out. She spoke with a calm authority, but Emily could hear the subtle cracks in her voice as she recalled the years spent chasing a ghost. As Kent spoke, Emily felt a strange sense of detachment. She had been waiting for this moment, this confrontation, but hearing the truth unfold in front of her felt like watching someone else's story, a story that had once been her own. The defense was next. Tom's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man who seemed to relish the challenge, painted a different picture. He argued that Jack's death had been an unfortunate accident, a tragic moment of escalation during a heated argument over the family ranch. Mr. Reynolds never intended to kill his brother, the defense attorney argued. This was a family dispute, yes, but not murder. Jack's death was the result of an unfortunate, unplanned push that led to a tragic accident. There was no malicious intent. Tom's face remained unreadable as the defense continued, and for a brief moment, Emily wondered if he still believed the lie he was telling. Could he really convince himself that it had all been an accident? That the brother he had murdered, the man he had once shared so much with, had simply disappeared by chance? The trial dragged on for days, each argument a slow unraveling of family secrets and buried emotions. Emily found herself back at the courthouse each day, sitting through the testimony, trying to make sense of the chaos that had destroyed her family. The pain of it all, the betrayal, the loss, the weight of years spent wondering, pressed heavily on her chest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury deliberated. The room was silent as everyone waited for the verdict, each person's thoughts trapped in the same moment of uncertainty. The judge returned, and the verdict was read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Tom Reynolds, guilty of manslaughter." The words rang through Emily's mind, but they felt distant, detached. She had hoped for justice, for an answer to the question that had haunted her for so long. But now that it had come, she didn't know how to feel. Tom's expression didn't change when the verdict was read. He sat frozen, as though the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him, and he had no more strength to fight. As the courtroom emptied, Emily remained seated, the sound of her heartbeat louder than the footsteps that echoed around her. The truth had come at a terrible cost, but it had come. She could no longer live in the shadow of her father's disappearance. But now there was no going back. The days following Tom Reynolds' conviction were heavy with an uneasy calm. Denton County had finally gotten its answers, but the town felt no closer to healing. The truth, once buried so deep, had surfaced, but the cost was greater than anyone had expected. For Emily, the weight of her father's death was still fresh, but now it was paired with the stark reality that the man responsible was her own uncle. She didn't return to the family ranch after the trial. The thought of stepping foot there, where the echoes of her childhood lived, felt suffocating. Instead, Emily spent her days at the small house she'd made her own, her mind constantly replaying the trial, her thoughts circling around Tom. She didn't know what to feel anymore, the relief that justice had been served, or the ache of knowing the person who should have protected her father had been the one to destroy him. Her phone buzzed with a message from Detective Kent. "How are you doing?" Emily stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "I'm okay, just trying to figure out what comes next." The message didn't help, but somehow she felt less alone. Kent had been there through the entire investigation, through the darkest moments, and had never asked for anything in return. It was an unspoken bond forged in the fires of truth and pain. Emily knew she wasn't the same person she had been before the trial. She had learned things about her family, about Tom, that would never be erased. But she also realized that there was no going back. There was no undoing the years of waiting, of uncertainty, of living in the shadow of a man who had once been everything to her and now was nothing but a ghost of betrayal. Still, she had to move forward. She had to find a way to heal, for herself, and for the memory of the father she had lost. A week after the trial, Emily visited Lake Louisville again. The water, so calm and still, seemed to mock her, a reminder of how things could have been, how life could have been. She sat on the edge of the dock, her feet hanging over the side, and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The sun began to set, casting a warm, orange glow over the water. Emily thought about the past, about the man who had once driven her home from school, who had taught her how to fish on this very lake. She had lost him to a cruel twist of fate, and now her uncle, the man who should have been her protector, had taken him from her. But in the silence of the lake, in the peace of that moment, Emily felt something stir inside her, a spark of hope. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. She didn't know if she ever would be, but she was ready to move forward, to stop being defined by the pain of her past. The truth had come at a terrible cost, but it had also freed her. Jack Reynolds had been taken from her, but his memory, his legacy would live on. Emily would make sure of that. As she stood up to leave, she took one last look at the lake, the weight of everything she had endured still pressing down on her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face what was next. A month had passed since the trial, and the weight of the truth was still heavy on Emily's shoulders. The quiet evenings were the hardest, the stillness of her house echoing with memories of a life that had been irrevocably altered. Despite the conviction, the sense of finality, there were days when she could hardly believe that her Uncle Tom was behind bars. She could still hear his voice in her head, trying to convince her, to make her doubt the truth. But the truth had come, and with it a crushing clarity. Emily spent more time at Lake Louisville, the place where her father had once taken her fishing and told her stories of the past. It had become a sanctuary for her, a place where she could be alone with her thoughts and feel the weight of everything she had lost. The lake, calm and still, reflected the sky like a mirror, as if it too had been waiting for the truth to emerge. There, at the water's edge, Emily reflected on the person she had been before the trial, the hopeful, optimistic woman who believed in the goodness of people. That person seemed so distant now. The grief of losing her father, the shock of discovering Tom's betrayal, and the pain of living with a new truth had changed her in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. But she also realized something important. She had survived. Despite the darkness, despite the years of uncertainty, Emily had made it through. And though it didn't feel like it yet, there was a path ahead of her, a way to heal, to move forward. One evening, as the sun began to set over the lake, Emily received a call from Detective Kent. She had been keeping her distance, allowing Emily the space she needed to process everything. But now Kent's voice was warm and familiar, a steady presence in the whirlwind of Emily's thoughts. "How are you holding up?" Kent asked. Emily sat on the dock, looking out over the water, the sound of the waves gently lapping against the shore. "I'm okay," Emily replied. "I think I'm starting to understand that it's okay to not be okay. I don't have to have all the answers, I just have to keep going." Kent paused for a moment. "You've done more than most people could. And you're not alone in this. Whatever comes next, you've got people who care." Emily smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "Thank you, Laura. You've been more than just a detective to me. You've been a friend." "Always," Kent replied. "Remember, healing doesn't happen all at once, but you're on your way." As Emily hung up the phone, she felt a weight lift off her chest. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. There was still so much ahead, memories to be cherished, wounds to be healed, and a life to be lived. And though she would never forget her father, nor the man who took him from her, Emily knew that she had the power to create something new. She would honor Jack's memory, not with bitterness, but with the strength to keep moving forward one day at a time. A year had passed since Tom Reynolds' conviction, and though Denton County had begun to move forward, Emily still found herself at the lake every few weeks. The water had a way of soothing her, its rhythmic ebb and flow reminding her that time moved, whether or not she was ready. The pain, the grief, they hadn't disappeared, but they were no longer the overwhelming forces they once were. Emily had returned to teaching, and the quiet hum of her classroom had become a steady rhythm in her life. Her students were bright and full of life, their energy a contrast to the heaviness that had once consumed her. The echoes of her father's absence still lingered in the corners of her heart, but now they were accompanied by a sense of peace. She had finally accepted that some questions would never be fully answered, but that didn't mean the story of her life was over. One afternoon, Emily received a letter. The envelope was simple, with no return address. Inside, she found a handwritten note from Detective Laura Kent. "You've shown more strength than most could ever hope to have. The truth about your father's death has been uncovered, but your story doesn't end there. The future is still yours to write. And as you do, know that you are never alone in carrying his memory forward. You've done what you needed to do. Now let the rest of your life unfold with the same courage." Emily sat in her car, the letter pressed between her hands, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Kent had been right. Emily didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know every detail of the past. What mattered now was how she chose to live, how she chose to honor her father's memory. As the years went by, Emily became a voice in her community, speaking at local schools, at veteran organizations, and even at events for families who had experienced loss. She told her story, not just of pain, but of perseverance. She told them that even after the darkest moments, there was still a light to be found, still a future to build. And every year, on the anniversary of her father's disappearance, Emily would visit Lake Louisville. She would bring fresh wildflowers, just as she had done all those years ago, and place them at the water's edge. On one such visit, as the sun set over the horizon, Emily whispered to the lake, "We found you, Dad. We found the truth. And I'm okay now. I'm going to be okay." The water, still and endless, reflected the glow of the sky, a reminder that, like the lake, she too could find peace, moving forward day by day, carrying her father's memory with her in the quiet moments and in the joy that awaited her. And as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of the water and the distant sound of waves lapping against the shore, Emily knew that she had finally closed the chapter, not with bitterness, but with the healing that comes from truth. The story was no longer a mystery. It was a story of survival, strength, and love, and now it was her story to share.